Did you know that Ferrari could have lost the 2026 season before it even starts? How has a single technical decision by the FIA unleashed chaos at Maranello and exposed all its weaknesses just when there is the least margin for error? Today, I explain why Ferrari is in one of the most dangerous moments in its recent history. Stay, because what's coming could change modern Formula One forever. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. On December 18th, 2025, while most teams were fine-tuning logistical details for the start of the competitive year, one of the most shocking decisions of the modern era was made at FIA headquarters. What is defined in the technical documents as a safety corrective amendment for many within the paddock was in reality a regulatory bomb that exploded in the face of the design departments. The trigger was a set of simulations carried out by several teams during the aerodynamic validation of the 2026 cars. These tests, mandatory before the first official shakedown, revealed a worrying pattern. In wet or low-grip track conditions, as usually occurs on urban circuits, cold asphalts, or after unexpected rain, the low downforce mode, which had to be used on straights, transformed the cars into unstable vehicles, prone to violent spins, even on a line. Straight. The data were unambiguous. They were alarming. The rear wing in flat mode lost the ability to maintain the vertical load necessary to stabilize the rear of the car, generating dangerous moments during acceleration and braking. Until that moment, the 2026 regulation had clearly established two operating modes for active aerodynamics: high load for curves and low load for straights. The shorter, lighter, and less mechanically resistant new generation cars had been designed with this combination as the fundamental basis of their structure. But the FIA, pressured by what it called an emergency of correlation between safety and regulations, decided to insert a third mandatory state into the system, the so-called partial aero mode. This new mode was not a simple cosmetic adjustment. It rewrote the principles of aerodynamic balance. From now on, when conditions were mixed or the track was declared at risk, the cars would not be able to activate the full low-load mode. Instead, a hybrid mode would be forced. The front wing would go flat to reduce drag, but the rear wing would remain in load configuration. The result was an asymmetric aerodynamic distribution, which sought to preserve stability without completely giving up top speed. And this is where the drama for Ferrari becomes the protagonist. Because while McLaren, Mercedes, and even Red Bull had adopted modular and adaptive design philosophies with variable geometry suspensions, active balance systems, and dual aerodynamic packages prepared for multiple scenarios, Ferrari had bet everything on a single card, maximizing efficiency in the two original modes. His 678 project was conceived to make the most of the transition from one to the other. There was no room for a third actor. The entire chassis, brake cooling, diffusers, and suspension maps were designed to behave within a binary load cycle. And now, with this new medium mode, Ferrari must not only redesign key elements of its aerodynamic package, but also remodel its CFD simulations, adjust the wind tunnel, and perhaps most delicately reprogram the internal logic of its dynamic control system. All this, weeks after the first private test, but the most dangerous thing is not the technical. It's the psychological thing. This type of blow is not seen, but is felt. It seeps into technical meetings, into engineers' nightly reports, into pilots' morale. What should have been an advantage, a clear development direction throughout 2025, turned overnight into a burden that threatens to drag the entire 678 project into a competitiveness crisis. And if that happens, there is no room for redemption. In the new era of advanced hybrid engines, active aerodynamics and electronic dynamic state control, missing a step early in the technical cycle is condemned to being behind for years. Was Ferrari prepared for such an abrupt change? Or did he simply underestimate the complexity of a regulation that continues to be written even when the cars are already in production? The answer to those questions may define not only the team's future on the grid, but also the legacy of an entire generation of Maranello. What hurts the most in Maranello is not the change itself, is the fact that Ferrari does not have time to react. The 2026 Project 678 car was conceived under a rigid, binary premise, deeply rooted in the two original aerodynamic modes approved by the FIA. This approach, although risky, had a logic: concentrate resources on optimizing a single technical concept to the extreme, betting on absolute efficiency in well-defined scenarios. But that logic became a trap when a third, unforeseen scenario appeared. And now, with the clock ticking, that design that was supposed to mark a new era is starting to look obsolete even before rolling. This is not a simple update. It is not enough to add new aerodynamic control software or adapt moving wings. The arrival of the partial aero mode implies a profound structural modification in the air flow, the pressure on the flat bottom, the interaction between the front and rear axle, and even more serious, the dynamic balance of a car in transition between modes. The Ferrari 678 was developed to operate at two extremes, high load and low load. Its suspensions, its anchor points, its active steering geometry, and its aerodynamic pressure maps are designed to move between those two poles with surgical precision. Adding a third intermediate point brakes, that closed system. The flat front wing and raised rear wing create a condition known as asymmetric crossflow, a state that was not contemplated in Ferrari's original simulations. This creates a very particular problem. The front axle now has less resistance, which increases corner entry speed, but the rear axle, with more load, responds in a completely different way. The result is a car that turns more than it should on entry, but loses stability mid-corner. It is a mixed behavior phenomenon that can only be corrected by reprogramming the entire suspension set, redistributing weights, and in many cases, redesigning the cooling channels of the brake system to adapt to new vertical loads. The problem: none of this can be done without returning to the wind tunnel. And Ferrari, as is well known, has a delicate history with the correlation between tunnel and track. For years, Maranello has suffered from a dangerous disconnection between what it projects in its simulators and what happens when the car hits the real asphalt. In a high-pressure, time-sensitive environment, redoing that correlation, now with a new parameter, is a luxury they may not be able to afford. At Ferrari, they know that there is no room for error in this area. What is at stake is not only the competitiveness of the first car of a new era, but the legacy of its hybrid project, started in 2014 with enormous difficulties and which only began to bear consistent fruit from 2022. Falling again into a slow development cycle disconnected from the leaders could return them to the same hell they experienced during Mercedes' hybrid era, when year after year the power deficit was insurmountable regardless of the talent of the drivers. Because beyond the aerodynamic problems, beyond the hybrid deficit, what is really undermining Maranello is a silent loss of confidence. That invisible but decisive force that sustains winning projects. That energy that transforms a good strategy into a victory, or a mistake into an epic comeback. Without it, what remains is doubt. And in Formula One, doubt is synonymous with defeat. The first symptom was visible in Australia. Lewis Hamilton, in his official debut with Ferrari, found himself not only with a car that did not respond to his commands, but with an environment that did not know how to explain why. Accustomed for years to a cold but predictable Mercedes structure, at Ferrari chaos has a historical aroma. Last-minute changes, divided decisions between engineers, and a car whose behavior varied from session to session without a coherent explanation. The most successful driver in history felt, for the first time since his days at McLaren, that he was alone on the track. And that for a seven-time champion is devastating. Furthermore, in the current grid, which is increasingly younger and more aggressive, the pressure for immediate results is brutal. Hamilton knows that his arrival at Ferrari is not a long-term bet. He has at most 2 years to achieve something significant before the future named Antonelli, Behrman, or Bortolino pushes him out. Leclerc, for his part, feels that his cycle as a protege is running out. If this project also fails, it is likely that its value as a pillar of the future will begin to erode. And in Formula One, the market does not forgive. This shared pressure generates a dynamic that feeds on itself. The more doubts there are in the car, the more risks are taken on the track. The more you risk, the more mistakes occur. And the more mistakes occur, the more faith is lost. It's a vicious cycle that can devour even the purest talent. Added to all this is a ruthless media environment. Ferrari, by history, cannot fail in silence. Every failure is a cover. Every strategic mistake is viral. And every word that comes out of the paddock multiplies in networks, press, and public opinion. Is constant scrutiny that affects decision-making. What conditions the strategies? That makes a technical team hesitate between taking risks or protecting themselves from Monday's headline. And that, in the midst of a technical transformation like that of 2026, is fatal. Because while Red Bull and McLaren work in the shadows, testing new systems, failing silently, Ferrari works in the spotlight. Any bold decision is a double-edged sword. If it works, it's a glorious redemption. But if it fails, it's another chapter in the long novel of the Scuderia's modern failure. Do you think Ferrari has time to make that turn, or are we seeing the prelude to another lost cycle? Can this team, as powerful as it is fragile, once again be the benchmark it was? Leave me your opinion in the comments. Your ideas and discussions make this channel grow and give life to this community of F1 lovers. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.